One night of weakness at a corporate retreat was all it took to shatter Sarah Mitchell's perfect life. Now, as she stares at two pink lines on a pregnancy test, the weight of her secret threatens to destroy everything she holds dear. With her husband's promotion on the line, and his boss's watchful eye following her every move, Sarah must decide how far she'll go to protect her family from a truth that could destroy them all. Sarah Mitchell stared at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands, her heart pounding against her ribcage as two pink lines materialized before her eyes. Under normal circumstances, this would have been a moment of pure joy. She and her husband James had been trying to conceive for the past year. But as she sat on the edge of her marble bathroom vanity, the weight of her secret threatened to crush her. 3 months ago, at the annual corporate retreat in the Hamptons, everything had changed. Sarah had accompanied James, a mid-level marketing executive at Maxwell Industries, to what was supposed to be a weekend of networking and team building. Instead, it became the weekend that would unravel the fabric of their seemingly perfect life. Richard Maxwell, the charismatic CEO of Maxwell Industries, had always shown a particular interest in James's career. He'd taken James under his wing, becoming something of a mentor to him. At 45, Richard was 15 years their senior, but his salt and pepper hair and confident demeanor made him incredibly attractive to women of all ages. Sarah had noticed this, of course, but had never thought much of it until that fateful weekend. The night of the retreat's gala dinner, James had gotten violently ill from some bad shellfish. He'd insisted Sarah attend the dinner without him, not wanting to waste the expensive ticket or miss the networking opportunity. That's when Richard had appeared, offering to keep her company. One glass of wine had led to another, and their conversation had grown increasingly personal. Richard had confided in her about his recent divorce, his loneliness at the top, and his regrets about prioritizing his career over family. Sarah had found herself opening up about her own struggles, the pressure to start a family, the string of miscarriages she'd never told anyone about, the growing distance between her and James. When Richard had invited her to his suite to continue their conversation in private, Sarah had known exactly what she was doing. She wasn't drunk enough to blame the alcohol, though she wished she could. Something about Richard's vulnerability, combined with her own emotional state, had created a perfect storm of poor judgment. Now, sitting in her bathroom, 12 weeks later, Sarah felt the full weight of her actions crashing down around her. James had been overjoyed when she'd started showing signs of pregnancy a few weeks ago. He'd even cried when she'd first mentioned her suspicions, hugging her tightly and whispering about how their dreams were finally coming true. They'd already started converting the guest room into a nursery. James had insisted on painting it himself, spending an entire weekend carefully coating the walls in a soft sage green. "It's gender neutral," he'd explained proudly, paint splattered across his old t-shirt. "And it's supposed to be calming for babies." The memory made Sarah's stomach turn. Sarah's phone buzzed on the counter, making her jump. It was a text from Richard. "We need to talk. Lunch tomorrow?" Her hands shook as she deleted the message, just as she'd deleted dozens before it. Since that night, Richard had been relentless in his pursuit of her, despite her insistence that it had been a mistake. The sound of keys in the front door made Sarah's heart skip a beat. She quickly wrapped the pregnancy test in tissue paper and buried it deep in the bathroom trash, underneath old makeup wipes and empty toilet paper rolls. She splashed cold water on her face and took a deep breath, preparing to face her husband. "Honey, I'm home!" James called out, his voice filled with the warmth and enthusiasm that had made her fall in love with him 8 years ago. "And I've got great news." Sarah emerged from the bathroom, forcing a smile onto her face. "What's the great news?" James was practically bouncing with excitement, his brown eyes sparkling as he loosened his tie. "Richard called me into his office today. I'm getting promoted to senior marketing director. Can you believe it?" The room seemed to spin as Sarah gripped the doorframe for support. That's wonderful, James." "The timing couldn't be better with the baby coming," James continued, pulling her into an embrace. "Richard said he's been watching my work closely these past few months, and he's really impressed with my dedication. He even mentioned possibly grooming me for a VP position in the future." Sarah felt bile rising in her throat. She gently pushed away from James, mumbling something about morning sickness, and rushed back to the bathroom. As she heaved into the toilet, she couldn't tell if it was the pregnancy or her guilt making her sick. Later that night, as James slept peacefully beside her, Sarah lay awake, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. The baby inside her could belong to either man. The timing made it impossible to be certain. She'd done the math countless times, hoping to find certainty one way or the other, but the dates overlapped by just enough to keep her in torturous doubt. Her phone glowed softly in the darkness as another message from Richard appeared. "Congratulations on the pregnancy. James told everyone at the office today. We really need to discuss this." Sarah felt tears rolling down her cheeks as she deleted this message too. The next morning, Sarah called in sick to her job at the local art gallery. She couldn't face anyone today, not even her coworkers who knew nothing about her situation. Instead, she spent hours researching paternity tests during pregnancy, learning about the risks and accuracy rates. The safest options couldn't be performed until after the baby was born, which meant months of living with this uncertainty. As she scrolled through medical websites, her mind wandered to the day she'd met James. They'd been set up by mutual friends who thought they'd be perfect for each other. And they had been. James was everything she'd ever wanted. Kind, stable, funny in an endearingly dorky way, and unwaveringly loyal. The kind of man who would make an amazing father. Richard was different. He was intense, passionate, and complicated. He had a darkness to him that both frightened and attracted her. During their night together, he'd shown her a vulnerability that few people ever got to see, but he'd also displayed a possessiveness that should have warned her away. The doorbell rang, startling Sarah out of her thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw Richard standing on her front porch, wearing an expensive suit and holding a manila envelope. Her heart stopped. "I know you're home, Sarah," he called through the door, his voice low but firm. "Your car is in the driveway. We need to talk about this situation." Sarah pressed her forehead against the cool wood of the door, trying to steady her breathing. "Please leave, Richard. There's nothing to talk about. I have a right to know if that child is mine," he insisted, "and I'm not going anywhere until we discuss this like adults." As if to prove his point, Richard sat down on the front porch steps, loosening his tie and settling in for a long wait. Sarah watched through the window as he pulled out his phone and began making calls, conducting business from her front porch, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The situation was becoming impossible. Her neighbors would start to notice soon, if they hadn't already. Questions would be asked. Rumors would spread. She couldn't let that happen. With trembling fingers, Sarah dialed her best friend Emma's number. Emma answered on the second ring, her voice cheerful until she heard the tremor in Sarah's voice. "I need your help," Sarah whispered, watching Richard through the window. "I've done something terrible, and I don't know how to fix it." "I'll be there in 15 minutes, Emma replied without hesitation. "Don't do anything until I get there." As Sarah waited for Emma to arrive, she thought about the life growing inside her. Regardless of its parentage, this baby was innocent. It deserved better than to be born into a web of lies and betrayal, but the truth could destroy everything. James's career, their marriage, the life they'd built together. The sound of Emma's car pulling into the driveway finally made Richard stand up and straighten his suit. He watched as Emma marched up to the front door, her expression fierce and protective. Sarah quickly let her friend in, catching a glimpse of Richard's frustrated face before shutting and locking the door. "Start from the beginning," Emma said, leading Sarah to the couch. "Tell me everything." And so Sarah did, the words pouring out of her like a river breaking through a dam. She told Emma about the retreat, about Richard's persistent messages, about the pregnancy test and the devastating uncertainty about the baby's father. Emma listened without judgment, her hand squeezing Sarah's whenever the tears became too much. "He's not going to let this go," Emma finally said, glancing out the window where Richard's car was still visible in the driveway. "Men like him are used to getting what they want." "I can't lose James," Sarah whispered. "He's the love of my life. This baby, it has to be his. It needs to be his." Emma was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. "You know, my cousin works for a private investigator," she said slowly. "She's mentioned some interesting stories about powerful men and their indiscretions. Maybe it's time to fight fire with fire." Sarah looked up, wiping her tears away. "What do you mean?" "Richard has a lot more to lose than you do," Emma explained. "He's the CEO of a major corporation. If word got out that he slept with an employee's wife at a company retreat..." The implication hung heavy in the air. Sarah had never considered using the situation against Richard, had never thought of herself as someone capable of blackmail. But as she placed her hand on her stomach, feeling the first flutter of movement deep inside, she realized she would do anything to protect her family. "I need time to think," Sarah said, watching as Richard finally got into his car and drove away. "This isn't just about me anymore." Emma nodded, understanding the weight of the decision. "Whatever you decide, I'm here for you. But Sarah, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that the truth will come out one way or another. Secrets like this rarely stay buried forever." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across her living room floor, Sarah thought about the months ahead. She thought about doctor's appointments and ultrasounds, about James's excited face as they prepared for their baby's arrival. She thought about Richard's determination to be involved if the child was his, about the way he could destroy James's career with a single word. The sound of James's car pulling into the garage made both women jump. Emma quickly gathered her things, giving Sarah a tight hug before slipping out the back door. Sarah straightened her clothes and wiped her face, preparing to greet her husband with a smile she didn't feel. "You're home early," she said, as James walked in, carrying a large shopping bag. "I couldn't wait to show you what I bought," he grinned, pulling out a tiny onesie with "Daddy's Little Marketing Expert" printed on it. The whole office pitched in to get it custom made. Even Richard contributed, said it was the least he could do for his future protege. Sarah felt the room spin again, but she managed to keep her smile in place. As James continued to pull out more baby items from the bag, chattering excitedly about their future, Sarah made a decision. She would protect this happiness at any cost. The question was, how far would she have to go to keep her secret? That night, as she lay in bed listening to James's steady breathing, Sarah's phone lit up with one final message from Richard. "I've scheduled a private meeting with James tomorrow morning. Time's up, Sarah. Either we handle this our way, or I handle it mine." Sarah stared at the ceiling, her mind racing with possibilities. Emma's suggestion about the private investigator lingered in her thoughts, along with darker alternatives she'd never imagined herself considering. In just a few hours, her entire world could come crashing down, unless she found a way to stop it. The baby kicked, as if sensing her distress, and Sarah placed both hands protectively over her growing belly. Whatever happened next would determine not just her future, but the future of her child. As the night grew deeper and sleep continued to elude her, Sarah began to formulate a plan. The morning dawned gray and cold, matching Sarah's state of mind. She'd barely slept, spending most of the night crafting and discarding different plans. As James got ready for work, humming cheerfully in the shower, she made her decision. "I'm going to come into the office with you today," she announced as James straightened his tie. "Maybe we can have lunch together?" James's face lit up. "Really? That would be great. The team would love to see you. Everyone's so excited about the baby." The drive to Maxwell Industries was tense, at least for Sarah. Her stomach churned as they pulled into the parking garage, and not from morning sickness. She spotted Richard's black Mercedes in its reserved space near the elevator. He was already here, waiting. "I think I'll stop by HR first," Sarah told James as they entered the lobby. "Update my information as your emergency contact, that sort of thing." "Good thinking," James said, kissing her cheek. "I'll see you at lunch then, around noon." Sarah nodded, watching as her husband disappeared into the elevator. Instead of heading to HR, she made her way to the executive floor. Richard's secretary looked up in surprise as Sarah approached. "Mrs. Mitchell, I didn't know you had an appointment." "I don't," Sarah said firmly. "But Mr. Maxwell will want to see me, now." The secretary hesitated, then pressed the intercom. "Sir, Mrs. Mitchell is here to see you." There was a pause before Richard's voice came through, smooth as ever. "Send her in." Richard was standing at his floor-to-ceiling windows when Sarah entered, his back to her. "I assume you're here about the meeting with James?" "Cancel it," Sarah said, proud of how steady her voice remained. "Whatever you're planning, it stops now." Richard turned, his expression unreadable. "And why would I do that?" Sarah pulled out her phone, bringing up a carefully prepared email. "Because if you don't, this goes to every board member, major shareholder, and news outlet in the city, complete with hotel receipts, security camera footage from the retreat, and testimony from 3 staff members who saw you enter my room that night." Richard's face darkened. "You're bluffing?" "Try me." Sarah's finger hovered over the send button. "I have nothing left to lose. You, on the other hand, I have a right to know if that child is mine," Richard growled, taking a step toward her. This child, Sarah said, her free hand protectively covering her stomach, will be raised by James Mitchell, my husband, the man who's been nothing but loyal and loving, the man whose life you destroy just to satisfy your ego. It's not that simple. It is that simple, Sarah cut him off. You're going to cancel that meeting with James. You're going to give him that promotion because he deserves it, not as part of whatever game you're playing. And you're going to stay away from both of us. Richard's jaw clenched. And if the child is mine, then that's something I'll have to live with, Sarah said quietly. But you won't be part of it. Ever. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken threats and possibilities. Finally, Richard reached for his phone. Jennifer, he spoke to his secretary, cancel my morning meeting with James Mitchell. Actually, clear my whole morning. I'm not feeling well. Sarah waited until he hung up. Wise choice. As she turned to leave, Richard called after her. You know this isn't over, Sarah. Secrets have a way of coming out. Sarah paused at the door. Maybe, but by then, it won't matter. You'll have moved on, found someone else to manipulate, and my family will be stronger than ever. She walked out of his office with her head held high, but her hands were shaking. In the elevator, she finally allowed herself to breathe normally again. Her phone buzzed, a text from Emma. My cousin's contact came through with everything we needed. How did it go? Sarah smiled grimly as she replied, It worked. For now. She made her way to the building's coffee shop, ordering herbal tea to settle her nerves. As she waited for lunchtime, she thought about the months ahead. The baby would be born in spring, a time of new beginnings. Whether it was James's child or Richard's, she would love it unconditionally, but she would also make sure it grew up knowing right from wrong, understanding the importance of honesty and loyalty. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. This seat taken? Sarah looked up to find Lisa, Richard's secretary, standing by her table with a coffee cup in hand. The older woman's expression was kind but knowing. Please, Sarah gestured to the empty chair. Lisa sat down, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. You know, I've been Mr. Maxwell's secretary for 15 years, seen a lot of things, handled a lot of situations. Sarah's heart rate picked up again. I'm not sure what you mean. Just that you're not the first, dear, Lisa said gently. But you might be the smartest. The others, they always wanted something. Money, position, revenge. But you just want peace. I want my family, Sarah corrected her. Lisa nodded. That's why I think you'll be okay, whatever happens next. As if on cue, Sarah's phone lit up with a message from James. Running late for lunch. Budget meeting went long. Rain check? Sarah typed back a quick, of course, before turning back to Lisa. Why are you telling me this? The older woman stood up, smoothing her skirt. Because someone should be in your corner, and because... She hesitated. Because I've seen what happens when these situations spiral out of control. Be careful, Mrs. Mitchell. Not everyone in this building is what they seem. With that cryptic warning, Lisa left Sarah alone with her thoughts and her cooling tea. The baby kicked again, more insistently this time. Sarah rubbed her belly, whispering softly, It's okay, little one. Everything's going to be okay. But as she watched the busy office workers hurrying past the coffee shop windows, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Richard might have backed down for now, but men like him didn't give up easily, and Lisa's warning suggested there were other players in this game, ones Sarah hadn't even considered yet. The real question was, how long could she keep juggling these secrets before something, or someone, made them all come crashing down? Sarah spent the next few weeks walking on eggshells, jumping every time her phone buzzed, or when an unexpected visitor arrived at the gallery where she worked. But Richard seemed to be keeping his distance, at least for now. James was thriving in his new position, coming home each day with stories of successful presentations and growing responsibilities. The baby continued to grow, becoming more active with each passing day. At their 20-week ultrasound, Sarah and James learned they were having a girl. James cried again, clutching Sarah's hand as they watched their daughter move on the grainy screen. The technician pointed out her perfect spine, her tiny fingers, her beating heart. She's beautiful, James whispered, and Sarah felt her own tears falling. That evening, as James called their families to share the news, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at the gallery just before closing time. Lisa, Richard's secretary, slipped in quietly while Sarah was arranging a new exhibition. "Mrs. Mitchell," Lisa said softly, glancing around to ensure they were alone. "We need to talk." Sarah's heart sank. "What's happened?" "Nothing yet," Lisa replied, her voice low and urgent. "But there's going to be a board meeting next week. Richard's wife, his ex-wife, she's making some accusations about his behavior with female employees and their spouses. She's demanding an investigation." The room seemed to spin. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because they'll be looking at everything. Company retreats, expense reports, security footage. And because Miranda Maxwell isn't just Richard's ex-wife, she's also the daughter of the company's largest shareholder." Sarah sank into her office chair, her hands instinctively going to her growing belly. "What? What should I do?" Lisa placed a thick envelope on Sarah's desk. "These are copies of everything they might find. Security logs, credit card statements, even some emails Richard thought he'd deleted. You should know what they know." "Why are you helping me?" Sarah asked, staring at the envelope as if it might bite her. Lisa's expression softened. "Because 20 years ago, I was you. Different man, different circumstances, but the same impossible choice. No one helped me then. The least I can do is help you now." After Lisa left, Sarah stayed late at the gallery, reading through every document in the envelope. Her hands trembled as she realized how careless they'd been that night, how many electronic breadcrumbs they'd left behind, the hotel keycard records, the elevator camera footage, even the room service order. It all painted a damning picture. When she finally got home, James was waiting with takeout and a surprise. He'd finished setting up the nursery. He led her upstairs with his hands covering her eyes, practically bouncing with excitement. "Ta-da!" he announced, revealing the completed room. Sarah gasped. The sage green walls were now adorned with hand-painted butterflies and flowers. A white crib stood beneath the window, draped with delicate curtains. In the corner, a comfortable rocking chair waited beside a small bookshelf, already filled with children's stories. "I had some help," James admitted. "The art department at work pitched in with the mural. Even Richard's ex-wife, stopped by to consult. She's got amazing taste." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Miranda Maxwell was here?" "Yeah, she's been helping with some big accounts at work. She's actually really nice. Nothing like the stories Richard tells. She brought that blanket for the crib, said it was a family tradition." Sarah walked over to the crib, where an exquisite hand-knitted blanket lay folded. A card was attached. "For the newest addition to the Maxwell Industries family. With love, Miranda." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep again. The envelope from Lisa sat hidden in her gallery office, but its contents haunted her. Miranda Maxwell's involvement couldn't be a coincidence. The blanket felt less like a gift and more like a message. Her phone lit up with a text from Emma. "Just heard about the board meeting from my cousin. You need to be ready." But ready for what? Sarah wondered. Ready to lose everything? Ready to watch her marriage crumble? Ready to have her daughter born into a storm of scandal and whispers? The baby kicked vigorously, as if sensing her mother's distress. Sarah got up and walked to the nursery, sitting in the rocking chair James had so carefully chosen. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, making the painted butterflies seem to dance on the walls. "What am I going to do?" she whispered to her unborn daughter. "How do I protect you from all of this?" The answer came to her slowly as she rocked in the quiet darkness. She couldn't keep running, couldn't keep hoping the truth wouldn't catch up. She needed to take control of the narrative, but on her own terms. Pulling out her phone, she typed a message to Lisa. "We need to talk. Tomorrow morning. I have an idea." As she waited for her response, Sarah studied Miranda's blanket in the moonlight. Its pattern was complex, generations of Maxwell women adding their own touches to the design. Running her fingers over the soft wool, Sarah realized something. She wasn't the only one with secrets to protect. The question was, whose secrets would prove more dangerous in the end? The next morning, Sarah met Lisa at a small cafe far from both Maxwell Industries and her gallery. The older woman arrived carrying a leather briefcase that looked heavy with more than just papers. "Before you tell me your idea," Lisa said, stirring her coffee methodically, "there's something you should know about Miranda Maxwell." Sarah leaned forward, her hands wrapped around her own untouched tea. "She's not just investigating Richard's indiscretions," Lisa continued. "She's building a case to take control of the company, Her father's health is failing, and there's a succession battle brewing. Richard's personal life, his behaviors with female employees and their families, it's just ammunition. And my situation could be the smoking gun she needs, Lisa finished. Or it could be her undoing, Sarah said quietly, finally understanding the weight of Miranda's seemingly innocent involvement in her life. Lisa nodded, opening her briefcase. Miranda's not as clean as she pretends to be. The Maxwell family has a long history of using people as pawns in their corporate games. Here, she slid a folder across the table. Inside, Sarah found photographs, bank statements, and emails dating back years. They told a story of corporate espionage, backdoor dealings, and personal vendettas that made her own situation seem almost trivial in comparison. The blanket she gave you, Lisa said, it's not a family tradition, it's a message. She gives them to all the women she's planning to use against Richard. It's her calling card. Sarah felt sick. How many? 7 that I know of. But you're different. You're carrying a baby that could be a Maxwell heir, that makes you either very valuable or very dangerous to both of them. The baby kicked hard, and Sarah pressed a hand to her side. I won't let my daughter be a pawn in their game. Then you need to decide what you're willing to sacrifice to keep her out of it. Sarah pulled out her phone, showing Lisa the plan she'd drafted in the early hours of the morning. As the older woman read, her eyebrows rose steadily. This is ambitious, Lisa said finally, and dangerous. If it backfires, I know, but I'm running out of options and time. The board meeting is next week, and this baby will be here in a few months. I need to end this now. Lisa studied Sarah's face for a long moment before reaching into her briefcase again. Then you'll need these too. She produced another stack of documents. Records of every deal Miranda has orchestrated behind the scenes, every person she's manipulated, every life she's ruined in her quest for power. Why didn't you use these before? Timing, Lisa said simply, and waiting for someone with enough courage, and enough to lose to use them properly. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from James. Baby furniture assembly scheduled for this weekend. Dad's bringing his tools and his famous chili. You in? The normality of it, the pure innocent joy in his message, made Sarah's heart ache. She looked up at Lisa, her decision crystallizing. I'll need your help, she said, and Emma's, and maybe even Richard's, though he won't know it. Lisa smiled grimly. Tell me what you need. For the next hour they plotted and planned, their coffee growing cold as they considered every angle, every possibility, every potential fallout. When they finally parted ways, Sarah felt lighter despite the weight of what lay ahead. On her way to the gallery, she stopped at a small boutique and bought a ball of soft blue yarn. That night, as James worked late preparing for another presentation, Sarah began knitting. Her mother had taught her years ago, and though her stitches were clumsy at first, she soon found her rhythm. Your blanket will be made with love, she whispered to her daughter. Real love, not games and manipulation. As she worked, she thought about the week ahead, the board meeting that could change everything, the plan that could either save her family or destroy it completely, the web of lies and power, plays she'd stumbled into. Her phone lit up with another message, this time from an unknown number. The blanket suits your nursery perfectly. We should talk soon. Miranda? Sarah looked at her own creation taking shape in her lap. Simple, honest, imperfect. Then she began to type her response, setting the final pieces of her plan in motion. Sarah arranged to meet Miranda Maxwell at an upscale restaurant the following day. The woman who sailed through the door at precisely noon was everything Sarah had imagined and more, elegant, commanding, and wearing a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Sarah, darling, Miranda air-kissed both her cheeks. I'm so glad we could finally meet properly. That nursery of yours is absolutely charming. Thank you for the blanket, Sarah replied carefully. It was quite a statement piece. Something flickered in Miranda's eyes, recognition perhaps that they were speaking in code. Family heirlooms often are. Speaking of family, how are you feeling? The 3rd trimester can be so challenging. Actually, I wanted to discuss family with you, Sarah said, opening her purse. She withdrew a single photograph and slid it across the table. Specifically yours. Miranda's perfectly manicured hands froze over her water glass. The photograph showed a much younger version of herself, leaving a motel with a man who was decidedly not Richard Maxwell. dated just 2 weeks before her marriage to Richard. Where did you get this? The same place I got these. Sarah pulled out her phone, showing a series of emails that made Miranda's face go pale. It seems we both understand the importance of keeping records. What do you want? Miranda's voice was ice. I want you to withdraw your demand for an investigation, cancel the board meeting, and then I want you to take an extended vacation, somewhere far away from Maxwell Industries. Miranda laughed, but it was brittle. You're playing a dangerous game, little girl. No, Sarah leaned forward. I'm ending the game, all of them. Or would you prefer I share with the board how you've been secretly funding your father's competitors? How many families you've destroyed in your quest for control? How many of those blankets you've handed out came with strings attached? You're bluffing. You couldn't possibly have. 6 offshore accounts, Sarah interrupted. 3 shell companies, 12 former employees paid to spy on Richard. Should I continue? Miranda's composure cracked, just slightly. Lisa, she whispered, she gave you everything. Not everything, just enough. The rest I found on my own. It's amazing what people will tell you when they realize someone finally has the power to end the Maxwell family drama. And what makes you think you have that power? Sarah smiled, resting one hand on her swollen belly. Because right now, I'm carrying the only heir to the Maxwell fortune. Whether this baby is Richard's or not, that possibility alone would throw the company into chaos if it became public. Your father's shareholders wouldn't like that uncertainty, neither would the press. Miranda studied her for a long moment. You've thought this through. I've had nothing but time to think, and unlike you, I'm not interested in power or money. I just want my family left alone, all of us. And Richard? What about his rights if... Richard will do what's best for the company, Sarah cut her off. Just like you will. Because the alternative is watching everything your family built crumble under the weight of all our collected secrets. The waiter approached with menus, but Miranda waved him away. She reached for her purse, withdrawing a slim phone. A few taps later, she showed Sarah the screen, an email canceling the board meeting, citing new information that made the investigation unnecessary. Satisfied? Sarah nodded. Your flight to Europe leaves tonight, first class, of course. I took the liberty of making the arrangements. You really have thought of everything, Miranda said, a hint of admiration in her voice. But remember this, power changes people. The moment you picked up those knitting needles to make your own blanket, you became one of us. No, Sarah said firmly. I became a mother. There's a difference. As Miranda stood to leave, she paused. The pattern on my blanket? Did you notice it tells a story? Yes, Sarah said quietly. A story about sacrifice, about choices, about what we're willing to do for the people we love. Keep it, Miranda said, as a reminder, because someday your daughter might need to understand those same lessons. After Miranda left, Sarah sat alone at the table, her hands shaking as she sent a series of texts, one to Lisa, one to Emma, and finally, one to Richard. It's done. Your ex-wife won't be a problem anymore. In exchange, you'll never contact me again. We both know it's better this way. The response came almost immediately. You've learned well. Take care of them both. Sarah deleted the message, then deleted her entire message history. In her purse, the ultrasound photo from her last appointment showed a perfect baby girl, her tiny hands curled as if in prayer. Sarah touched the image gently. I promise, she whispered, your story will be different. That evening, as she worked on her simple blue blanket while James chatted excitedly about nursery furniture, Sarah thought about Miranda's warning. Had she become like them? Or had she simply learned to protect what was hers? The baby kicked, and Sarah smiled. Perhaps the real lesson wasn't about power at all. Perhaps it was about love, and the fine line between protecting it and destroying it in the process. As Sarah's due date approached, life settled into an uneasy peace. Miranda remained in Europe, her social media showing carefully curated photos of cafe visits and museum tours. Richard kept his distance, though Sarah occasionally caught glimpses of him in the building when she visited James for lunch. He'd aged somehow, the silver in his hair more pronounced, the lines around his eyes deeper. The nursery was complete, filled with gifts from family and friends. Both blankets, Miranda's intricate heirloom, and Sarah's simple blue creation, draped over the crib rail, telling their opposing stories in silence. Sarah often found herself standing in the doorway at night, one hand on her belly, wondering if she'd made the right choices. Then, 3 weeks before her due date, everything changed. It started with a call from Lisa. "You need to see this," the secretary said without preamble. "Check your email." The attachment was a draft of a press release, set to go out the following morning. Richard Maxwell was stepping down as CEO of Maxwell Industries, effective immediately. The reason cited was personal health concerns, but Lisa's message told a different story. Miranda's father died last night, heart attack. The power structure is shifting, and Richard's trying to protect his position by stepping aside temporarily. But there's more. Sarah's blood ran cold as she read the next paragraph. Richard had named James as interim CEO. "He can't do this," Sarah whispered. "He already has. The board approved it an hour ago. James is in Richard's office right now, getting the news." Sarah's hands shook as she hung up. This wasn't a promotion, it was a trap. By putting James in charge, Richard was ensuring his own legacy while potentially exposing everything. One wrong move, one discovered document, one loose thread, and it would all unravel. Her phone buzzed again. James this time. "Amazing news! Can't talk now, but we're celebrating tonight. Love you both so much." Sarah sank into her office chair at the gallery, her mind racing. She'd thought she'd handled everything, tied up all the loose ends. But Richard had found another way to keep his hooks in their lives. As long as James was connected to Maxwell Industries, they'd never truly be free. The baby kicked hard, making Sarah wince. She'd been having practice contractions all morning, but this felt different, more urgent, as if her daughter knew something was wrong. "Not yet, little one," she murmured. "Mommy needs to fix this first." She called Emma, quickly explaining the situation. Her friend was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe it's time to tell him," Emma finally said, "before he takes this position, before it's too late." "I can't," Sarah whispered. "Not now, not when he's so happy." "Then what's your plan?" Sarah looked at her computer screen, at the press release that would change their lives forever. "I need to see Richard, one last time." "Sarah, no, you're too close to your due date. It's too risky." "It's riskier to do nothing." Sarah stood up carefully, gathering her things. "I won't let Richard use my husband as a shield, not after everything." She made her way to Maxwell Industries, ignoring the growing discomfort in her lower back. The security guard smiled as she signed in, commenting on how soon the baby would arrive. Sarah managed a weak smile in return. The executive floor was quiet when she arrived. Lisa was at her desk, her face drawn with concern. "He's alone," the secretary said without being asked. "James left 10 minutes ago." Sarah nodded her thanks and pushed open Richard's office door. He was standing at his usual spot by the windows, but this time he turned when she entered. "I wondered if you'd come," he said softly. "Call it off," Sarah demanded. "Find someone else to be your puppet CEO." Richard smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's done, Sarah. The board has approved it. James has accepted. And really, isn't this what's best for everyone? Your husband gets the career he deserves. The company stays in trusted hands. And you," he paused, glancing at her belly, "you get to keep your secrets." A sharp pain shot through Sarah's abdomen, stronger than before. She gripped the back of a chair, trying to stay focused. "If you think I'll let you use James to protect yourself—" "From what?" Richard interrupted. "From Miranda? She's gone. From the board? They trust me. From the truth?" He stepped closer. "The truth is, Sarah, you need this as much as I do. James in this position means protection for all of us. For you, for me." His voice softened. "For her." The baby kicked again, violently, and Sarah gasped as another contraction hit. This one was unmistakable. Richard's face changed. "Sarah, are you—" "Don't," she managed through clenched teeth. "Don't pretend to care now." But as she tried to turn away, her water broke, sending a puddle spreading across Richard's expensive office carpet. The last thing Sarah saw before the pain overwhelmed her was Lisa rushing in, phone in hand, calling for an ambulance. "Hold on," she heard Richard saying, his voice seeming to come from far away. "Just hold on, I'm calling James." As the contractions intensified, Sarah realized with crystal clarity that her daughter had just made the choice for all of them. She was coming now, here, in the very office where all their secrets had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The next few hours passed in a blur of pain and confusion. Sarah was vaguely aware of being moved to an ambulance, of Richard barking orders into his phone, of Lisa holding her hand and whispering reassurances. But one voice cut through the chaos. James, arriving just as they were loading her into the vehicle. "I'm here, honey," he said, climbing in beside her. "Everything's going to be okay." The hospital was ready for them when they arrived, a team of nurses whisking Sarah away to the delivery room. Through the haze of pain, she caught glimpses of familiar faces. Emma rushing in, still wearing her work clothes, Lisa hovering in the hallway, and Richard standing like a dark sentinel at the end of the corridor, his face unreadable. "The baby's in distress," she heard someone say. "We need to move quickly." James squeezed her hand, his face pale but determined. "You can do this, Sarah. You're the strongest person I know." Hours passed. The contractions grew more intense, the medical team more concerned. Sarah heard words like complications and emergency procedures being thrown around. Through it all, she kept her eyes fixed on James, drawing strength from his unwavering presence. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to creep through the hospital windows, their daughter made her entrance into the world, the room filled with the sound of her angry cries, strong and defiant. "She's perfect," the doctor announced, placing the tiny bundle on Sarah's chest. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Sarah looked down at her daughter's face for the first time, and in that moment, all her fears and doubts melted away. The baby had James's nose, his gentle eyes. But there was something else there too, a strength, a determination that Sarah recognized from her own reflection. "What should we name her?" James asked softly, perching on the edge of the bed. Sarah touched her daughter's tiny hand, watching in wonder as the perfect fingers wrapped around her own. "Grace," she whispered, "Grace Emma Mitchell." Later, as James went to call their families, Sarah lay in her hospital bed, studying every detail of Grace's sleeping face. A soft knock at the door made her look up. Richard stood in the doorway, hesitating for the first time she'd ever seen. "May I?" he asked quietly. Sarah considered refusing, but something in his expression made her nod. He approached the bed slowly, his eyes fixed on the baby. "She looks like James," he said after a long moment. "Yes," Sarah replied simply. "She does." Richard ran a hand through his silver hair. "I've been thinking about what you said, about using James as a shield." He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "This is my formal recommendation to the board. Thomas Chen from marketing would make an excellent interim CEO. James deserves a normal career trajectory, not to be thrust into a position that could—" He paused. "That could complicate things." Sarah shifted Grace in her arms, studying Richard's face. "Why?" "Because looking at her, I realize some things are more important than power or position." He placed the envelope on her bedside table. "I'll have Lisa submit it this afternoon." As he turned to leave, Sarah called after him softly, mindful of the sleeping baby. "Richard?" He paused at the door. "Thank you." He nodded once, then disappeared into the hallway. Sarah looked down at Grace again, touching her daughter's perfect cheek. "Your daddy loves you so much," she whispered, "and he's going to be the best father in the world." James returned a few minutes later, his face glowing with pride and joy. "Our parents are on their way, and the office sent these." He held up a massive bouquet of flowers. "Even Miranda sent a congratulations email from Paris." Sarah smiled, making room for him on the bed. As James settled beside them, carefully cradling their daughter, she felt a deep peace settle over her. The secrets and lies that had haunted her pregnancy were fading away, replaced by something stronger and purer. The love of a family, bound together by choice rather than obligation. Grace yawned, her tiny face scrunching up before relaxing again. In that moment, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that every decision, every manipulation, every careful move she'd made had been worth it. Not for power, not for protection, but for this. The chance to give her daughter a life free from the games and machinations that had nearly destroyed them all. "I love you," James whispered, kissing her temple. "Both of you." Sarah leaned into his embrace, holding their daughter close. "We love you too, more than you'll ever know." Outside the hospital room, life at Maxwell Industries continued its complicated dance of power and politics. But inside this quiet space, Surrounded by the warmth of true love and honest joy, Sarah had finally found her peace. Grace would grow up knowing only the simple blue blanket her mother had made, its uncomplicated stitches telling a story of love rather than manipulation. And perhaps that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all. 5 years passed like the turning of pages in a storybook. Grace grew into a vibrant, curious child, with her father's laugh and her mother's determination. James's career at Maxwell Industries flourished naturally, earning promotions through merit rather than manipulation. Richard had kept his word, remaining a distant figure in their lives, visible only in passing at company events. On Grace's first day of kindergarten, Sarah stood in the doorway of her daughter's room, watching her try on her new backpack. The 2 blankets still lay folded at the foot of her bed, Miranda's intricate heirloom and the simple blue one Sarah had made. Grace always preferred the blue one, saying it felt more like home. "Mommy, will you tell me the story again?" Grace asked, twirling in front of her mirror. "The one about how I was born in Daddy's office building?" Sarah smiled, settling into the rocking chair. "Well, you were certainly in a hurry to meet us that day." "And Mr. Maxwell was there," Grace added excitedly. "Daddy says he used to be his boss." Sarah's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes, he was. But you know what the most important part of that day was?" "What?" "The moment your daddy held you for the first time. His eyes got all watery, and he said you were the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen." Grace beamed, climbing into Sarah's lap. "Even more beautiful than the paintings in your gallery." 1,000 times more beautiful. A knock at the door interrupted them. James stood there, camera in hand. "Ready for the first day photos?" As they posed in front of the house, Sarah caught a glimpse of a familiar black Mercedes driving slowly past. Richard, older now, but still unmistakable behind the wheel, nodded once before continuing down the street. Grace, oblivious to the moment, waved at the shiny car. That evening, after Grace was asleep, Sarah found James in their home office, looking through old photos on his computer. "I still can't believe how much she's grown," he said, pulling Sarah onto his lap. "Remember the day she was born? All that chaos at the office? The ambulance ride?" "I remember everything about that day," Sarah said softly. James kissed her temple. "You know, Richard announced his retirement today, complete surprise to everyone. He recommended me for the executive team." Sarah stiffened slightly. "What did you say?" "I told them I'm happy where I am. The executive floor." He shrugged. "Too many politics, too much drama. I'd rather be home for dinner with my girls." Relief flooded through Sarah. "We'd rather have you here too." Later that night, Sarah stood in Grace's doorway again, watching her daughter sleep. The moonlight caught the 2 blankets at the foot of her bed, their different patterns casting intricate shadows on the wall. One told a story of power and secrets, the other of simple, unconditional love. Grace stirred, blinking sleepily. "Mommy, will you tell me another story?" Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing her daughter's hair. "Once upon a time," she began, "there was a woman who learned that the most powerful thing in the world isn't money, or position, or even secrets. It's love, pure and honest love. Like you and Daddy?" "Like you and Daddy," Sarah confirmed, "and like my love for you." Grace snuggled deeper under her blue blanket. "Is that the moral of the story?" Sarah smiled, thinking of all the choices and chances that had led to this moment. "Yes, sweetheart, that's the moral. Love, real, honest love, is stronger than any secret, greater than any power. And when you have it, you need to protect it, cherish it, and never take it for granted." "I love you, Mommy." "I love you too, my sweet girl, more than you'll ever know." As Grace drifted back to sleep, Sarah thought about the path that had brought them here, the lies, the manipulations, the careful dance of power and protection. In the end, she had chosen love over everything else, not just romantic love, but the fierce, protective love of a mother for her child. The truth about Grace's paternity remained unspoken, locked away with all the other secrets of that tumultuous time. But looking at her daughter's peaceful face, Sarah knew it didn't matter. Grace was James's daughter in every way that counted, born of love rather than obligation or power. And that, perhaps, was the greatest truth of all.